Good mythical afternoon, everybody. This is Mr. Ayala with another video for you. This is 3.2, the New England Colonies. So a few things. Please make sure you're writing notes as we go along and that you are answering the questions as well to get your score. So today we're going to start off with 3.2, the New England Colonies. They are Massachusetts Bay slash Plymouth, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. So we're going to start off with the Mayflower and the Pilgrims. So the Pilgrims were a separatist group that wanted to separate themselves from the Church of England. They wanted to completely get away from England themselves. So they ended up going to the New World and founding Plymouth Colony in 1620. This would later be absorbed into Massachusetts Bay Colony, which is now Massachusetts. So they sailed over on the Mayflower, but it was blown off course and it ended up in New England. It was supposed to land in Virginia near Jamestown, but luckily for the Pilgrims, they were actually blown off course, and it forced the Pilgrims themselves to create the Mayflower Compact, which was the first written constitution in the New World, which allowed the rule of law. And it also established the idea of self-governance in the New World. When they landed, they did have some issues with food, but not as bad as Jamestown. So, and luckily for the Pilgrims, they ended up finding two Native Americans, Samoset and Squanto, who happened to know English and were in the area, who began to help them learn how to farm properly in the New World. So they taught them how to grow the food, how to fish, and just how to survive. And they were also interpreters, pardon me, for different groups of Native Americans. And this would also is where we get the idea of Thanksgiving, when everyone would celebrate having enough food. Unfortunately, though, the day after, the Pilgrims then decided to attack the Native Americans and take the rest of their food. But when you're starving, what can you do? Then we get to the Puritans. They are a religious group that wanted to purify the Church of England, and they founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony, or what would later become Massachusetts. So the Puritans are actually reformers. They wanted to get rid of all the extra stuff that the Church of England did and purify it to its main religious core. And during this time, there was a great migration of Puritans from the Old World, mostly England, Germany, and the Netherlands, to colonies all around the world, in particular Massachusetts. They received the royal charter, or an agreement from the king that they were allowed to create their colony in New England, and they prepared. So they did not have a starving time, and they actually focused on building a community. So the Puritans themselves were extremely conservative in their viewpoint as Protestant Christians, almost to the extremist perspective. Their whole life revolved around the church itself. They went to church every Sunday. That was their day of rest. If you were part of the society and you had to go to church, or you would be punished. You could be banished or killed. One of the ways they did it was called pressing, is when they would lay these people on slabs of rocks and stack boulders on top of them until the truth is pressed out of them, until they get the information they want. They'd also throw people into rivers to see if there were witches, because a witch would float while a Puritan would sink and drown. No matter what, you're going to end up dying. But at least in the Puritan perspective, if you died by drowning instead of floating up to the surface and having me killed, at least you get to go to heaven based on their perspectives. And this actually brings a lot of conflict into the Puritan church and the people who live there as we go further and further into this course. So from there, we have their first governor, John Winthrop. He's the first governor of Massachusetts Bay, and he writes and gives the sermon known as A City Upon a Hill, which establishes this idea of an American exceptionalism. The idea that the United States and that the colonies in this area, known as Massachusetts, are there for the rest of the world to look up upon, to show the world how to create a proper society. And this continues throughout our history, even to modern times, that, us in the United States, we believe that the United States has a special place in all the nations among the world. We're one of the most diverse in all of human history. We're the beacon of light for, to allow immigrants to come in and join us in this great experiment known as the Republic. But and John Winthrop starts this concept, though he really focused it on the idea of community building and religion. But throughout time, it gets recodified again and again and again into this concept known as American exceptionalism. So from there, we end up with the New England Way, so the beliefs of society. So the society in particular really is why the Puritan perspective, the New England Way, and John Smith's "He that shall not work shall not eat" really begins the American work ethic. That we work really, really hard, and that we do a lot of that. That's why when we introduce ourselves, we always say, "Hey, my name's blah blah blah. I do this for a living," because it's part of our culture. And then the New England Way also focused on going to church, being honest, and having integrity. Your education, because public education and schools started in New England, in particular to read their holy text, the Bible. And there was no time for fun or games because people were busy trying to get their society to work, to actually build it. And this was a major factor on the growth, because if the focus of your culture is to be honest, work hard, and focus on the community, it's going to force the community to grow faster. So from then, we end up with other people like Thomas Hooker in Connecticut. He set laws that limited the powers of the governor and expanded the right to vote to even allow non-members of the church to vote, because he had a major issue with the Puritans and their perspective on religion, that you had to be part of a church to vote. And then he was like, that doesn't make any sense. The church shouldn't tell us how to vote, or we shouldn't have to be part of a church to vote. So this begins the concept of freedom of religion that we will codify later in the Bill of Rights through Amendment 1. So these Puritan leaders kept being challenged. So you have Roger Williams, who he created the First Baptist Church. He disagreed with forced church attendance and the use of force to grab Native American lands. He thought that was wrong. So he founded the tiny colony of Rhode Island, where he guaranteed two major items: freedom of religion and separation of church and state. And yet again, this will be added to our culture, both politically and in general, throughout our history. Then we have Anne Hutchinson, who is a female from Massachusetts Bay, who believes a person does not need a church, a minister, or a Bible to worship God, that a person could do it themselves. There was no need for a formal church. And this went completely against the ideas of the Puritans, because the Puritans believed in a very organized church, and that women should be seen but not heard, that a woman should have no place to express their beliefs in their religion. So she ends up fleeing to Rhode Island to try to escape persecution, and this becomes an issue. So then we end up getting the Quakers, who will begin to settle in this area and formally settle in what will later become the colony of Pennsylvania. And these Quakers believed that there was an inner light and you didn't need a church. They believed that all people should live in harmony and peace. They accepted other religions and ethnic groups. And because they were constantly attacked, imprisoned, and hanged in Massachusetts, they had a tendency to flee to Rhode Island. And later they would create the colony of Pennsylvania under the proprietor William Penn. Meanwhile, as the Puritan population began to grow, the Native American tribes in the area noticed that they were encroaching upon their land and were getting to the point that their numbers could wipe them out. So, Metacom, the leader of the Wampanoag tribe, who's known as King Philip, will begin to attack and try to get rid of the Puritans out of New England to protect his way of life. Unfortunately for Metacom, he does lose. His whole entire tribe is killed or sold into slavery, and their land was taken. And this is going to be a continuous effort and conflict between the new British American settlers, later the American government and the American settlers themselves, and the various Native American tribes, that the Americans are going to want to take the land and go westward to develop it. While the Native Americans are like, bro, you're taking my land, you're living on my land, and you're making it so that I can't continue to live the life that my family and ancestors have done for centuries. So, thank you very much for paying attention to this presentation, and as always, don't forget to be awesome.